بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of us. Ramadan Mubarak. May Allah accept our siyam, our qiyam, all our ibadat. This is the month of fasting, this is the month of prayers, this is a month of charity, month of sadaqat and khairat. So, what we are going to talk about is about zakat, which is a special charity, restricted charity. But sadaqah is a general term, and believers are required or urged to be the people of sadaqah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept the tawbah and accept the sadaqat. أَلَمْ يَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ يَقْبَلُ التَّوْبَةَ عَنْ عِبَادِهِ وَيَأْخُذُ الصَّدَقَاتِ وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ التَّوَّابُ الرَّحِيمُ إِن تُبْدُوا الصَّدَقَاتِ فَنِعِمَّا هِيَ وَإِن تُخْفُوهَا وَتُؤْتُوهَا الْفُقَرَاءَ فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَيُكَفِّرُ عَنْكُم مِّن سَيِّئَاتِكُمْ وَاللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرٌ. So sadaqah, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept the tawbah and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take the sadaqat. Sadaqat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes it and will accept and bless people who give the sadaqah. And sadaqah can be given openly, can be given secretly, privately, whatever way, give sadaqah. Sadaqah from the word sidq and sadaqah. So sadaqah shows a person's truthfulness, sincerity. And also when you give to somebody, you care for that person. So your sadaqah, you love and care for that person. So it's not just charity, I'm giving you charity. No, I'm giving you because you are a human being and I am a human being and we all have to care for each other. So sadaqah is a general charity and we are required to give. And it could be money, it could be something else. Even meeting somebody with a smiling face is sadaqah. It's a good thing. So sadaqah every day, you should do that. The Sahaba said, Ya Rasulullah, who has so much money to give sadaqah every day? Said that Abwab al-Khairi Kasira. There are many doors for good things. So you speak nicely, you help somebody who is walking, and somebody wants to ride, you give ride, you help. All of these different ways you can do that. And then he said, Ma naqasa malu min sadaqah. If you give charity, if you give money in sadaqah, it will increase your money. It will bring the more blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So money does not decrease because of charity. But then there is a special charity which is obligatory, farida, and that is called zakat. So zakat is a special charity. And it is the pillar of Islam, min arkanil Islam. Just like shahada, salat, siyam that we are doing now, hajj. In a similar way, zakat is farida. But this farida is not on everyone, only those who have money. And the money has reached Sahaba, as we will talk about that. So it is farida. Those who have money, they are supposed to give zakat. And Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu said, Buniya al-Islam ala khams, shahadat an la ilaha illallah, wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, wa iqamu as-salah, wa itaw az-zakah, wa sawm Ramadan, wa hajju al-bayt man istata'a ilayhi sabila. Abdullah ibn Umar said that Rasulullah said, Islam is established on 5 things. And these are arkan. Rukn is that, ma la yatahaqqaqu shay'un illa bihi. Rukn is that which is essential. Something will not stand, something will not exist unless it is done that way. So that's why it's one of the arkan, one of the rukn of Islam. So those who deny zakat as obligatory, as a pillar of Islam, they are not Muslims, out of Islam. And those who say, yes, it is, but they don't pay, negligent, they are sinners committing sin and may incur the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this life and in the other life. So it's very serious that people pay attention to zakat as they pay attention to salat, as they pay attention to siyam. So it is a beautiful word, zakah, yazku, something has become sweet, nice, pure. So zakat brings purity, sweetness, happiness in the society. When people pay zakah, they care for the people other way. And zakat also means tahara, tazkiyah is tahara. خذ من أموالهم صدقة تطهرهم وتزكيهم بها. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned both. And this sadaqah here, of course, means the obligatory charity. Quran used the word sadaqah sometimes for obligatory charity and sometimes for voluntary charity. For sadaqah is used for both. So خذ من أموالهم صدقة تطهرهم وتزكيهم بها. Both meanings are mentioned here for zakat. They take sadaqah from their money and you will be purifying them. They will receive purity. Purity for the money, purity for the person. It purifies the heart from selfishness, greed, materialism. And also, it purifies the money. If there is any mistake, any shortcoming in earning money, sadaqah will take care of that, inshallah. Zakat will take care of that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make it good. And it brings numu, growth. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu used to say, Nafsul mutasaddiq tazku, وماله يزكو, وهي تنمي الفقير. Beautiful explanation. The nafs, the soul of the giver, purifies. His mal increases because the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it helps the poor and the needy. So it's all of these three things are there in that. And in the Sharia, it is a specific amount that is to be given from the specific wealth and to a specific people. So this is a specific amount that is given, that is mentioned that you should do that from a specific wealth, and we'll mention that, all the details, and it is given for certain people. So zakat is a restricted charity, and it should be there. حصة مقدرة في مال معين يصرف لطائفة مخصوصة. It's mentioned in the Quran many times, and very often you will find that in the Quran, dozens of times you will find that zakat is mentioned with salat. أقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة. يقيمون الصلاة ويؤتون الزكاة. Many times you have that. So salat and zakat, both of them come together. It is mentioned by Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu that ذكر معا فمن لم يزكي فلا صلاة له. The both of them are mentioned together. And those who do not give zakat, even their salat is not accepted. May Allah save us from that. Because it's the whole totality of Sharia, totality of Islam. And Islam has to be implemented in every aspect of life. Otherwise, the results will be just what we have today in the society. So it is important that when people pay attention to all aspects. The Prophet ﷺ used to emphasize that, and also used to mention that there is a great sin in not giving zakat. And the punishment may come here in this life as well as in the life to come. The money that people will put together, all will be put together and heated in the fire of hell. And by that, people will be branded on their backs, on their sides, on their forehead. And it says, "Zuqu ma kanastum li anfusikum." Taste what you have collected yourself. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that in Surah Tawbah as well. So there are details of that. And Dr. Osman Umarji has, alhamdulillah, a very nice presentation. We have done this seminar together a few years. How many? 2 years? Yeah, alhamdulillah. So I will let him make the presentation, inshallah. And it is very clear, very good presentation, inshallah. So he'll present, and then after that, we will finish by Asr time. Hopefully, Asr is at 5 o'clock. So we'll finish by Asr, and then we'll go for prayer, take a short break for prayer, and then we'll have questions and answers. Okay? Inshallah, we'll have that. Dr. Osman Umarji, I have, unfortunately, my hearing problem has worsened with age. Alhamdulillah. Thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His blessing. I enjoyed it, but still. So we always pray. متعنا بأسماعنا وأبصارنا وقواتنا أبدا ما أبقيتنا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given time for everything. So He will, sometimes questions come and I don't understand what somebody is saying. So inshallah you will explain that. Okay, let's have the presentation.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه من والاه. Jazakumullah khair, Dr. Muzammil, for the introduction. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase you in goodness and improve your hearing, keep your eyesight strong, and give you good health. Alhamdulillah, so we are here today we got about 2 hours. We will speak about, for the first half before Asr, we'll speak about kind of the spiritual aspects of zakah, and then we will continue in the second half after Asr, the technical aspects, and then the questions, inshallah. I want to begin by just speaking very broadly about situating why zakah is important to speak about, because I know, alhamdulillah, you guys are here, but if you have a Welcome Ramadan seminar, you get a lot of people who show up. You have a Salah workshop, the masjid is going to be full. Right? You have a Hajj seminar, right? You have a lot of people who come. But certain subjects, for whatever reason, despite the fact they are pillars of Islam, like zakah, for some reason the Muslim community is still very far from understanding. And so I want to just again thank and acknowledge those of you who made the time today to learn about a topic that's rarely spoken about. And as Dr. Muzammil mentioned, it's something which is so serious it can take someone out of Islam if they don't practice it. Actually, one of the most scary and profound kind of manifestations of this is when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he died, and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq became the Khalifa. There was a number of tribes around in the Arabian Peninsula who said that we're no longer going to give zakah because we used to give zakah only to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And so when the Sahaba heard about this, they had to get together and consult one another. What should we do? And many of the companions were like, you know what, Islam is, it's in a state of chaos right now. The Prophet ﷺ just passed away. We don't want tribes to revolt. Let's take it easy. Let's not really rock the boat too much. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was, very emphatic in saying that if anybody differentiates between salah and zakah, right, then we're going to fight them. Because even if they withhold the reins of a camel in zakah, right, then we would fight them to the end. And these are called hurub al-ridda. There are wars of apostasy, where Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and the Sahaba fought these tribes to bring them back into Islam, to force them to pay zakah. So it is something which was taken by force, actually, by the Islamic State. The other thing to speak about again is that each pillar of Islam has its own element to it. So shahada is just with the tongue. You say la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, just the statement of the tongue, you become a Muslim. When it comes to salah, it's at the very basic level, it's an act of the body. You have to stand up, you have to raise your hands, you have to bow. Hajj actually is both. It requires money and it requires your body. But zakah is the only pillar of Islam. It's purely financial. As if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that your faith is not complete if you don't put your money where your mouth is. So if you're going to say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, then there's going to be a cost you're going to incur to this. a proof that you really believe this, which is why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, as-sadaqatu burhan. He said, charity is proof. It's a proof of whether you truly believe in Allah and His Messenger. So you can't say, you know what, I believe in Allah's Messenger, but don't touch my money. That undercuts the most fundamental belief, which is that our wealth actually is not our wealth. Our wealth is the wealth of Allah Azza wa Jal, and we are simply trustees. آمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَأَنْفِقُوا مِمَّا جَعَلَكُمْ مُسْتَخْلَفِينَ فِيهِ. Right? Believe in Allah and His Messenger and spend from that which we have made you trustees of. Allah has simply told us, here is money. Our job is to say, Ya Allah, how do you want us to spend it? Whatever you want. You want this percent for my son and my daughter when they die, this percent for my wife. Sam'an wa ta'an. I hear and I obey with inheritance laws, and I hear and I obey when it comes to what wealth I distribute to the poor in certain manifestations. So inshallah, with that, we will attempt to quickly kind of invoke and come to a spirit together as to why this matters so much. And the reason I do this is if we start talking about the fiqh of zakah, if we started right now and said right away, what is the halal and the haram? Everyone wants an out. They're like, well, what's the way I can minimize my liabilities, essentially, right? It's like taxes, right? And you go to TurboTax, or you go to your accountant and say, I want every loophole possible to minimize what I give, right, to the government, right? We don't want to do that with zakah, right? We don't want to have that attitude of how can I eliminate all my liabilities and give the very minimum. And I'll give you an example, right? There's people who say, to this day, who say, we don't pay zakah. I said, why not? So I have a mortgage. I'm in debt. I said, mashallah, brother, you have like a $3 million house, but it's a debt. Those who are in debt don't pay zakah. I said, this is not how it works, right? So we'll learn about all that today. So you have people who are millionaires, actually, right, who don't want to pay often their zakah. So as Dr. Muzammil mentioned, zakah is a beautiful word linguistically. In all the ibadat in Islam, it's important we come back to the linguistics of them because there's secrets within that. And so whether it be salah, right, whether it be siyam, right, whether it be any of these arkan of Islam, the linguistic meaning gives us some inspiration as to why it matters so much. So zakah has all these meanings in the Quran. It implies growth, increase, purification, cleansing. And as the ayah we mentioned, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا. Allah says that when your wealth is taken, that it is a means of purification and an increase for you. And we have to have yaqeen in that. Ya Allah, when I give, my money is becoming clean, my money is becoming pure, my soul is getting better, and my wealth is actually increasing, my sustenance is going to increase. And as the Shari'i definition of zakah, right, we differentiate here between, again, sadaqah, which is general charity. I can give sadaqah to any cause I want. I can give it to Muslims, I can give it to non-Muslims, I can give it to, the masjid, I can give it to a school, I can give it to build a road, I can build it to whatever cause I want. Unbounded charity. But zakah is the determined share of wealth prescribed by Allah to be distributed amongst deserving categories, which means that there is three things to speak about. What is it that I'm liable to pay on? What are the zakatable assets? What are the conditions that that wealth has to meet? And then who gets that wealth and in which way? So we'll inshallah unpack all of that. And before we get into all that, it's worth just stopping and saying there are maqasid, objectives to everything we do in Islam. Some of those are known to us, some of them are not known to us. But especially when it comes to some of the major ones, Allah tells us in the Quran specifically. When it comes to salah, He says that inna salata tanha al-fahsha'i wal-munkar wala dhikrullahi akbar. Right? That part of salah, one of the maqasid and the hikam and the ilal, the reasons and the wisdoms behind it for salah is that it's going to prohibit us from doing things that are wrong. Right? And it's going to bring us closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. Fasting again, kutiba alaykum as-siyamu kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. Fasting is a means to getting piety, God consciousness, and protecting ourselves from the wrath of Allah Azza wa Jal. Zakah as well has its objectives, and amongst those objectives, they are very macro, not just micro. Yes, it purifies your soul of stinginess. Yes, it purifies your wealth, but it actually has a greater manifestation in society. It is the financial pillar of Islam, right? So what does it do? It is first and foremost a welfare system of Islam, which means that a society that generates wealth also has to have a system of redistributing that wealth. And zakah is a primary mechanism of redistribution. Number two, it is part of the infrastructure of an Islamic economy. During the pandemic, how many of you got stimulus checks? Anybody? Right? Why did the government give you a stimulus check? Is it because they like you and they're just like, we got extra money, here's money for you? What was the logic of the government? to spend. They're worried that if people are scared that there's economic uncertainty, they're going to hold their money back. And if you hold your money back and you don't put it into the economy, it actually makes the economy go down faster, right? That's what facilitates recessions. So zakat, part of it is that you're just redistributing money to those who don't have it, because those who don't have money are not going to take your money and go put it in their bank. No, they need it for their food, they need it for their rent, they need it for their life necessities. So that money that the wealthy would just store and do nothing with would now get into the hands of those who are needy, who will then put it back into the economy that actually benefits the wealthy as well. So everybody benefits in the economic system, right, when we distribute zakat. And that stabilizes the society, it alleviates poverty, and one of the most important things, it creates that harmony between the rich and the poor. We live in a world today that the poor hate the rich everywhere. In most societies, the poor have disdain for the rich, and actually the rich have disdain for the poor. It's the culture of America especially. This belief of a meritocracy, that everything that I have done, it's an even playing field. No idea here of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being in charge, that Allah distributes as He likes. And this is a fundamental point. When Allah says in the Quran, "Ya awalam yaro anna Allah yabsutu rizqa liman yasha'u wa yaqdir." That do you not see that Allah distributes His wealth to who He wills in abundance, and He restricts it as He wills. Inna fi dhalika la ayatin lil mu'minin. Indeed, and that are signs for the believers. As you get older, you see these things in real life. When you're young, you think it's, I work hard, I become rich. I don't work hard, I don't. And then you go through life and you see things. I remember I worked at a corporation, a large engineering company, Fortune 500 company, and there was people who did not have bachelor's degrees, people who hardly had like a high school diploma. They were in the right place at the right time. They got shares, they became millionaires, and have coastal houses in Laguna today. High school degrees, right? Or you worked at Microsoft when it first started, and you were a janitor, or you were, in some other HR position that required really very little expertise, but you got shares, and your shares made you a millionaire. Is this because of your hard work? This is the qadr of Allah Azza wa Jal, that He intends for some people to be rich, and He intends for some people to have restricted means, even if they work hard. We accept the qadr of Allah Azza wa Jal. You see people with PhDs, subhanAllah, when I was living in Egypt, you drive around, half of the taxi drivers, they have advanced degrees. We're driving, literally. And the guy's like, oh yeah, I have a PhD in economics, I have a PhD in this. I said, you're driving a taxi. This is the qadr of Allah. They live in a certain time, in a place, in a circumstance. And so that's really important. I come back to this idea because it creates that harmony when you realize my wealth is not because of my hard work alone. It's because of Allah Azza wa Jal determining this for me. He knew that this wealth is good for me in maybe saving my iman, and He knew maybe if Allah had given wealth to someone else, maybe that's not good for their faith. We don't know. وَلَوْ بَسَطَ اللَّهُ رِزْقَ لِعِبَادِهِ لَبَغَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ. That if Allah was to give everybody an abundance of wealth, there'd be corruption in the world. Some people, power corrupts and wealth corrupts. And for some people, poverty corrupts. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he said that someone will ask Allah Azza wa Jal for wealth, and Allah will turn them away from wealth towards poverty because that's better for them. And someone will ask Allah for poverty, but Allah will turn them towards wealth because that is better for them. Each with the hikmah of Allah. So now a society where a rich person, because this is not because of my hard work alone, I'm going to give it to the poor people. How does the poor respond to that? Rather than cursing the rich person, they say, alhamdulillah, may Allah increase you. May Allah increase you in wealth because you do good with it. And the person who has the wealth now also looks at the poor, right, with a different heart. And this is why this harmony of sadaqah, right, even friendship, right, is supposed to develop, right, between all classes of society, because we distribute and share these things with one another out of our love, right, for one another, out of our obligation to Allah Azza wa Jal. So in a society that practices zakah, right, you see these manifestations come about. And so you see that zakah then addresses poverty. You see it creates economic growth. You see it reduces the crime rate. A society that people don't have to resort to crime is a society that's going to have a lower crime rate. People used to say all the time, they say, the Muslim countries, they're so corrupt. People, they lie and they cheat and they bribe and they this and they that. And they sit from the comfort of their homes in America or the West. And then you saw, again, that even the Americans or Europeans, you put them in a financial crisis, everyone starts cheating. Right? When the going gets tough, right? That's when the nafs is inclined towards doing things that are immoral. Allah said in the Quran, "Ash-shaytanu ya'idukum al-faqra wa ya'murukum bil-fahsha." Right? Shaitan, the key thing he does is promise people poverty. He threatens and warns you and promises you of poverty, then he commands you to immorality. Because once you fear you're going to be poor, now you begin to justify the haram. Well, everyone else cheats, everyone else lies, everyone else deceives. And so, actually when you give zakah and we redistribute that wealth, it lowers the incentive of somebody to resort to the immoral. And that could be either moral bankruptcy or even crime in this regard. Another big aspect of zakah I want to emphasize is that Islam is holistic in its economic guidance. The system of economics, right, zakah is a part of it. How? Umar ibn Khattab, he said the statement that many attributed back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, "Ittajiru fi amwal al-yatama la ta'kuluha az-zakah." He said, invest the wealth of orphans. So even if you have an orphan that you're responsible over, don't just let their wealth sit around. Because if it sits around, then the zakah will consume it. So in other words, there is an incentive to invest your money in Islam as well. If you have a checking account, and there are people like this who are out there, they're very risk averse. I know some of them, they come and say, "Sheikh, I'm very scared, I don't want to put my money in the stock market, or for this reason and that reason, I just have it in a checking account." This is a very bad idea. Islam discourages this behavior actually. Why? Because when you invest your money in society and you put it into businesses, that creates growth as well. It creates jobs, right? It creates growth, right? And it creates, economic prosperity. And one of the incentives is if you had $100,000 of money and you said, "You know what, I don't want to invest it." After 1 year, you have to pay zakat on it. That's $2,500. Now after year 1, you have $97,000, right? $500. And then you said, "Okay, I don't want to invest it again." Year 2, and year 3, and 4. After 6 years alone, you would have lost almost over $14,000. You have a 14% loss on your income if you did not invest it. So in many cases, right, zakah is like a negative interest rate, financially speaking, economically speaking, right? It's 2.5%, right, of money that's being taken away. Now, of course, there's a spiritual side we haven't gotten into. Just purely economic, Umar ibn Khattab is commenting that don't let your money sit around. Invest it. Now, for those of you who invest money, would you pick an investment that gave you 2.5% return? No? Most of you wouldn't, right? What's a good return? What is it? 4.5? Okay. Anybody else? I know you guys invest. What's a good investment? That's all you want? Above inflation? You just want to break even? Yeah, typically you say in this society, typically like 7 to 8%, so 5 to 7, 8%. That's normal. People would say that's a safe investment. They're comfortable with that. They would say if I have a 2% investment, they would take their money out and put it somewhere else. Now that's important because we have this mechanism that we put our money into investments. We're going to get back, inshallah, 7, 8, 9%. And as that keeps going up, Allah is not saying give all your profits. Actually, a very small portion of that. 2.5% of just cash. We'll get into the other aspects. But the beautiful thing is that your wealth will not decline over time if it's being invested, even as you're paying zakat. And that is a motivation for us to invest our money in good and right places. And might go up and it might go down. That's the nature of life. But typically, investments go up over time as long as you're making wise choices. I wanted to share this graph because I want to put into perspective what happens in a system that we don't have zakah. This is just showing from the late 80s to 2016, how does wealth operate in a society where actually you don't have a vehicle like zakah to redistribute, and you actually have the opposite vehicle. You have interest to increase your wealth. So in America, back in 1989, just look at the graph real fast, you see that the bottom 90% of Americans owned about a third of the wealth of the country. So again, the bottom 90% owned about 33% of the wealth of America. Look in the last few decades how they've declined. To this, now they own less than a quarter, right, of the wealth in America. Imagine, 90% of Americans own less than 25% of the wealth. Now you go to the top, let's go to the top 9%, right? They owned about 37%, and now they own a little bit more, right? They've gone up a little percent here and there, right? But you see the top 1% have gone up over the decades from 30% to, again, getting closer to 37, 38%. What is all this saying? This is saying that in this society, right, the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. And this, again, is why we have that hatred in the society. Because the poor, they see that. And they see that there's no way for mobility, right, when this system is before us, right, at a collective level. And again, just to kind of give you more, if you were to look at the distribution of wealth in America, the top 0.1%, their average net worth is about $1.5 billion, okay? 1.5 billion, right? So, those of you who are good at math, 0.1%, give me a fraction. Out of every, how many people is 0.1%? One in how many? Is it 1 in 100? Is it 1 in 10? 1 in 1,000, right? So 1 in every 1,000 people in this society has an average net worth of $1.5 billion. Okay? Just want you to take that, right? What is their zakah annually? On $1.5 billion. Math is not that strong. It's Ramadan. You guys are tired. So at $37.5 million a year, right? Now, I just want you to realize how many, so 1 in 1,000. How many people do we have in America in that 0.1%, right? A lot. It's not a few, right? And we can extrapolate this, but the point I'm making here is that the amount of zakat that would actually just be generated, even in this broken, corrupt economic system, if the top 0.1% were giving, or the top 1% would be astronomical, right? We're talking about in the hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars of zakat being generated, right? And I say all that, oh, here's my chart. I can show it to you, right? So the top 0.1%, they have about $1.5 billion of wealth. The top 1% has about $18 million of wealth, average, right? And you can keep going right up that list. So the point here I'm making is that if you were to just envision and just imagine that the Sharia is being applied, you will see how much money would be redistributed, right, from those who are wealthy to those who are not. So let's move to that. I want us to actually put some real numbers behind this. So these are, the economic impact of zakah has been studied by Muslim economists over the decades. We had one of the most famous ones, used to live here, Dr. Mundir, right, a local ISOC member, who did some of these studies. And many of these Muslim economists, what they found was that if a country, they looked at many Muslim nations, and they said if that Muslim country could transfer about 4% of their GDP from the rich to the poor, and there would be practically no more poor people in that country. So one example they had was Pakistan. If they said in Pakistan, 4% of the GDP would go to the poor, then they would have no more poor people in Pakistan, right? Then they said, okay, how much money should zakat generate? And they said, well, according to different countries, we estimate between 3 and 7.5% of the GDP would go to the poor if zakah was implemented. Which means that, worst case scenario, you would eradicate about 75% of the poverty. Best case scenario, you almost have double the need. You'd have no poor people and you'd have a lot of surplus, right? So which means we should have no poor Muslims in the world, right? Theoretically. If we have zakah being practiced, we would have very few poor people in the world, right? In the Muslim countries. And so they did some studies that say, well, how much? Remember, we need about 3 to 7.5%, right? That's what is needed of zakah in order to meet, right, that threshold. And you found in these various studies that in most Muslim countries, you don't even get 1%, right? You have 0.02%, right, in Egypt, or 0.02%, right, in Jordan or Kuwait. So you have less than 1%, less than 0.5%, right, in most of these countries, which means that the Muslim world, for whatever reason, is not properly collecting and distributing its zakah. And before we look and say bad Muslim world, let's look in our own society. And are the American Muslims properly paying their zakah, right? And again, that's why we're here, to make sure that we are fulfilling our end of the bargain, because Allah will ask us not if we alleviated the poverty of the Muslim world globally, but even our own local Muslims, right? In Garden Grove, right? In Orange County, in Southern California, are we able to at least put a dent in the poverty of our own brothers and sisters? And we can go to history to actually say there's precedent for this, right? A couple of famous scenarios that are mentioned was during the Khilafah of Umar ibn Khattab, when Mu'adh ibn Jabal was the governor of Yemen. that one year he sent back, after collecting all the zakah, he sent back a third of the zakat to Umar, and he was unhappy. Because Umar was like, I don't want you to collect taxes and send me all these taxes. Give it to the poor. And then the next year, he had half he sent back. And the third year, he sent all of it back. In other words, Mu'adh sent a letter saying that I would give the zakah the first year, and 2/3 of the zakah fulfilled the needs of the poor. And then the second year, half the zakah fulfilled the needs of the poor. And then by that third year, he said there was no more zakah to distribute, so all the money came back to Medina to be distributed in other ways, right? So in a short period of time, a few decades, right, the land of Yemen, right, the Prophet ﷺ is the one who sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal when he was a young man to Yemen. One of the last, and he said, he told Mu'adh that, perhaps I'll never see you again. And he never did, right? The Prophet ﷺ passed away before Mu'adh was ever able to come back. But Mu'adh was able to eliminate, again, the poor, the poverty in his land. About 100 years later, when Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was the Khalifa, the great-grandson of Umar ibn Khattab, similarly, the governor of Egypt wrote to him saying that they had actually exhausted, right? They used the zakat and there was no more poor people. So then Umar advised them to actually get people to run up and down the street, just yelling in the neighborhoods. Say, is there anyone who has a debt so we can pay off their debt? Are there any slaves that could be purchased so we can free you? Or is there anyone who wants to get married so we can pay for you to get married? Right? And then after all that, it was, build kind of stations on the highway so people could rest and take breaks. The point again here in Egypt, zakah was eliminating the poverty of that society. So, in conclusion of this first section, again, I just want us to review that zakah at an individual level has benefits, right? It purifies the wealth of the person, increases their wealth, it blesses their wealth, it prevents it from loss and destruction. This is a really important one. Sometimes people take a very kind of materialistic view of their money. They say, I have $1,000 in my hand today. If the imam says who was going to give a donation, well, if I give him $100, I lose $100. So then I'm going to walk out with $900, right? And they don't realize that there's actually, your rizq has been written, right? As you're driving home, right, or anything else is happening, right, your stocks might be going down, right? Something at home might break, the toilet breaks, you need to call a plumber, and you would have lost $100 anyway. Either you can have the $100 go in charity and then have Allah increase it, or it can go in something else and you get nothing out of it at the end of the day, right? So Allah protects our wealth from loss and destruction, right, when we give it, right? For the individual, of course, as well, it's a means of forgiveness. It raises them in rank, increases them in their good deeds. It increases them in rizq. This is really important. So it's not just you give money and Allah gives you back money. But you want health, right? You want peace of mind. You want righteous children. You want your kids to get married. Maybe you want to get married. You want your parents to have a long life. You want all these different, non-monetary aspects of rizq are also things that are growing when one gives zakah. That perhaps it's through our charity that Allah is blessing our children or keeping our health intact, right? Or all these other benefits that we wouldn't be able to identify. And then, of course, for society, it helps those who are in perpetual states of need. Orphans, elderly, right? Women, right? The retired, the disabled. It creates jobs, eliminates debt in society. It protects, again, the society collectively. It creates harmony, it creates economic growth. And I'll conclude on this section with some ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about for the Muslims to reframe how we think about growth. Because it's fascinating in the Quran, there's actually many words that have the meaning of growth or increase. And the most common ones that people know are actually riba and zakah. I find it fascinating. So the word riba that we all know today to mean kind of economic interest, that's haram, actually has a very similar linguistic meaning as zakah. They both mean to grow or they both mean to increase. And so actually it's true, when one puts their money, right, in an interest-bearing account, they're doing it because they want it to increase. I want this account that's going to give me 2% back, right, or 3% back, right, whatever the nominal interest rate is, you're hoping that causes your money to grow. And then someone thinks the opposite. I give my zakat and my money is going down. So it seems counterintuitive. Riba seems to be growth, and zakat actually seems to be loss, right? That's what it seems like. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly puts this together in the Quran to really kind of shake us, to get us out of this kind of material way of seeing the world, kind of a metaphysical understanding of this, when he says, وَمَا آتَيْتُم مِّن رِبَا لِيَرْبُوَ فِي أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ فَلَا يَرْبُو عِندَ اللَّهِ. What you see is not the reality. He says, that which you give in riba, in interest-based transactions, to grow your wealth with people than to know that does not grow with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا آتَيْتُم مِّن زَكَاةٍ تُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَ اللَّهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُضْعِفُونَ. I find the word choice fascinating. One of the common words we use with interest today is we use the word compound interest, right? What is compound interest? Anyone know? Yeah, so whatever money you put in, it's not just the capital that's growing, but it's the additional money you've put in that keeps growing, right? So it's increasing manifest times. Allah uses that same terminology but flips it. He says, no, 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 no. In interest, there's no real growth. There's no barakah, right? There's no true increase. But that which you give in zakat, desiring the countenance and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is those who will have the compound growth. So now you have to believe. Who do you believe? Do you believe Adam Smith? And do you believe the Federal Reserve? Or do you believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? I mean, these are serious. I don't say this rhetorically. I really, really mean it. For all of us to stop and say, when I'm making my choices of how to spend my money, invest my money, where is my yaqeen? Where is my conviction? La yanqus, that wealth does not decrease with sadaqah. Right? La yanqus malun bi sadaqatin fatasaddaqu. Do you really, and do I believe it, that wealth does not decrease with charity? And if you really, really, really believe it, then you can see why the Sahaba, radwanullahi alayhim, would have no problem when the Prophet is saying, who could give wealth? And then the Sahabi comes and says, here's a third of my wealth. And then Umar ibn Khattab comes and says, here's half of my wealth. And Abu Bakr Siddiq comes and says, here's all of my wealth. And he says, what did you leave for Allah? What did you leave for your family? He said, I left Allah and His Messenger, right? Now, the Prophet did not ask us to do this. In fact, he told us, don't give more than a third of your wealth, right? Because there's a fitna, right, to people's nafs if this happens. But the Sahaba had no problem with that, many of them, because they had conviction that when I give in charity, that this money is going to grow and it's going to be safe, and Allah will take care of my family, right? So redefine growth and make sure, because I know we're here to speak about zakah, but I want you to think globally about how you spend your wealth and where you put your investments. Because all this is one big package of barakah at the end of the day, and I'll conclude on that point, is that barakah is another Arabic word that we're here to understand it, that implies growth and increase. And this is what we want in life. Barakah, really for non-Muslims, it's a foreign idea. A dollar is a dollar. There's no difference between the dollar that's made in this way and a dollar that's made in that way. But for the Muslim, it's not like this. Barakah for us, it connotes that something has received the tawfiq of Allah Azza wa Jal, and therefore if Allah has given this, He said, I accept this money. Then what is He going to do to that? That money is going to be productive. It's going to be efficient. It's going to be nourishing. It's going to be valuable. And I really mean this when the Prophet ﷺ, when he says things like the food of one is enough for two, the food of two is enough for four, the food of four is enough for eight. There's something real to this. Sometimes you might go somewhere and you buy like a meal and you spend $10 on that meal and you're still hungry. Has it happened to you before? Yeah, you're like, man, I need a second burger, right? Or you buy food for a group of people and you say, man, that actually didn't suffice. It doesn't suffice if Allah does not bless it. If that wealth is not halal, right? If that wealth has not been used properly, then Allah will restrict the barakah of the meal you bought. And someone else, he buys much less than you. You bought the combo, right? With all the fries and the sides and this and that, and you're still hungry. And someone buys just the side. And they eat the side and they're full. This is barakah. And we believe in this deep in our soul. Really, it's a serious concept. And so, I just want us to leave this session by realizing that like the value of anything we possess, it's not fixed and intrinsic to that commodity, right? Rather, the value of whatever we own is simply proportional to the barakah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given it. Right? This is yaqeenan, we have to believe this. It could be in my house, it could be in my car. You see some people, they buy a car, and then they're like, man, I bought this car, it's broke down, this is not working, that is not working. 2024 model, stop working in a few months. You see someone else, they have a 1990, 2000, 25-year-old car, 250,000 miles, and the tires keep rolling and the engine keeps rolling, and what is it? Right? It's probably Japanese, but beyond that, right? There is some barakah in it, right? That Allah is protecting someone. So you know what? Not going to give him a flat tire, not going to give him a transmission that needs to be changed, right? And so, we end this before we go technical, as we get ready for Asr, holistically realizing that our wealth has to be halal. The means by which we acquire it have to be halal. We have to spend it in a way to protect it from destruction, spend it in a way that Allah increases it in goodness, ultimately not just for our individual benefit, but for the benefit, right, of the entire society around us. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bless our wealth. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts to giving it. We ask Allah to purify our hearts from the stinginess of our souls. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Okay, so we'll break, pray Asr, and we'll resume with the technical portion of our session, inshallah. Okay. We have a mu'adhin volunteer.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
You can use this. It's fine.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
استووا التراصوا يرحمني يرحم الله. Keep your line straight. Keep your hearts focused on Allah Azza wa Jal. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. A couple of quick announcements. Number one, we'll be resuming the Zakat Seminar right after everyone's done. And then starting tonight, Salat al-Isha will be at 9 o'clock p.m. Again, Salat al-Isha being moved 15 minutes from 8:45 to 9 o'clock p.m. starting tonight. Isha, 9 o'clock p.m. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, we'll continue. I know time is of the essence. I wanted to try to end by 6. It's going to be very difficult. So we'll see how it goes. During this session, if you have questions related to what I'm speaking about, you can stop and ask me questions. So what I'll do actually is, Timur, you want to take this? If anybody has a question, just raise your hand. You can use the microphone. You can obviously just use your voice, but if you want the mic, you can use the mic. And then we'll go from there. And then at the very end, if you have any specific questions, we can have an open Q&A, inshallah. Okay. Dr. Muzammil's back. Alhamdulillah. Okay. So inshallah, what we want to speak about now is getting into the technical aspects, right? So now we know, okay, zakah is important, right? It's a pillar of Islam. There's consequences. There's great rewards. But really, at the end of the day, what is zakatable, right? What is it that we're liable to pay zakah on? What is exempt from our zakah? What are those terms that I've heard before? I have to have the nisab. It has to be subject to the hawl. Talk about these terms. Who pays zakah, and then who receives zakah. So we'll go through each of those, inshallah. Let's start with what is considered zakatable, right? Right. That's a word we've made up, right? Zakatable assets. So we want to think about the way in Islam, people often think that zakah is just like you throw all your assets together. That's not actually true. There's different liabilities for different types of wealth. So what we're going to do today is we're going to speak about gold, silver, money, liquid kind of accounts, kind of as one big bucket. Then there's another bucket of agricultural produce, which I will not speak about unless you tell me you have farms. Right? It happens sometimes. Someone says, yeah, I own a farm in, Central Valley, something like that. Then livestock, right? If somebody has, free grazing, cows and camels and buffaloes and goats and sheep, then we can also talk about that. Then, of course, there's real estate, there's business assets, and then there's jewelry. So all of these things we'll, inshallah, discuss. So the first thing is discuss, what do you not have to pay zakat on? And unlike what people often think of your net worth as being kind of what you're liable for, it's not. It's just all items for personal use are exempt. So your home is exempt. Even if you have 2 homes, you have a summer home, it's also exempt. Anything you're using for personal benefit and not for business reasons is exempt. Your car is exempt, right? Your second car is exempt, right? Your whatever it might be, your Lamborghini for the weekends is exempt, right? Those things are not liable to zakah as long as you're using it for personal enjoyment and pleasure. The third thing, according to 3 of the madhahibs, we'll get into it in more detail, is jewelry that women are wearing. So again, the 3 of the madhahib, we'll go into detail. Other than the Hanafis, they say that jewelry that women wear is not liable to zakah, and the Hanafis will say that it is. So let's quickly talk about 2 terms that we have to understand. The first term is the nisab, and the second term is hawl. So these are part of the technical criteria. So nisab refers to the minimum amount of wealth that one has to own before they become liable to paying zakat on anything. So to give an example, right, someone might have $1,000 of money. That's their total value, right? We would say they have not met the nisab. They have not met the threshold of wealth to be liable to pay. And what's important is that different asset classes have different types of nisab. So the nisab for, again, buffalo is different than the nisab for agricultural produce, which is different than the nisab for cash and kind of liquid assets, right? So the second term is hawl, and hawl refers to not what people think of like just a year, but specifically a lunar year. It's very important because people often say, I pay my zakat every, January 1st. It's not every January 1st. It has to be on the lunar calendar because this is what we count as the passing of a lunar year while having the nisab, right, is how we think about the hawl. So this issue of time applies to some assets and not other assets. So it applies to your money, but it does not apply, for instance, to your agricultural produce, right? So again, nisab is something we're going to think about, and there's different nisabs for different asset classes. Hawl is something we're going to think about. Some things have a hawl and some things don't have a hawl, right? We'll go step by step, but just now we got the 2 terms in our heads, right? Minimum amount and then passage of time, these 2 things. So who has to pay? So Muslims have to pay. Non-Muslims are exempt, right? Because in this case of being in a Muslim state or anything else, right, they would pay jizya instead. But Muslims, they pay zakah. The one who owns and possesses a nisab, he is liable for paying zakah. The one who has possession of that wealth for a lunar year, when applicable, has to pay zakah. The person whose debt considerations, they're not insolvent, their total assets outweigh at least their short-term debts. We will talk about long-term debt later. And I know the difference of opinion between madhahib. I personally hold the position that age is not a requirement. The Hanafis say that you have to be at least of puberty. That even young children who are wealthy have to pay zakat according to the majority of the scholars, because the debate is zakat a right on the wealth or is it just on the person? So some of the madhahib say it's the right of the wealth that it is subject to zakat. And so this case, if anyone here has young children who mashallah have made it, right? Maybe they're YouTube celebrities or Twitch celebrities, right? If they're under 16 or under puberty, they still would have to pay. And also it's important because sometimes what people do is they will distribute wealth amongst their kids, and also a way to reduce their liabilities, right? So I'll say, okay, I got a whole lot of money, but let me take my money and let me give 100,000 to kid A and 100,000 to kid B and 100,000 to kid C. So now, mashallah, my kids are very rich, but I don't have any money, so I don't have to pay any zakah, and my kids don't have to pay zakah, right? No, this is not how it works, right? You're liable, right, if you own that wealth. So let's talk about what most people care about, which is the topics of gold, silver, cash, and liquid accounts. So the way that we're going to think about this is we're going to start with the nisab. What is the actual nisab? The Prophet Muhammad and the early seerah, the scholars would establish there was two different common types of nisab, and they were tied to the gold and the silver prices of the time. Shaykh al-Qaradawi and many contemporary scholars are of the opinion that because of the silver price today is so low relative to the price of gold, that many scholars prefer just using the gold nisab to make life easy. And so just like, I think this is from like a week or two ago, approximately, so the threshold is going to be about 85 grams of gold. And 85 grams is equal to about 3 ounces. And each ounce of gold today is about $2,100. So let's just say approximately $6,000, because it fluctuates every day. If somebody owned $6,000 of total gold, silver, cash, liquid accounts, that would put someone at the nisab. You are now considered wealthy from an Islamic standpoint, right? You are considered to have the threshold of wealth that makes you amongst those who may have to pay zakah. And so this is going to apply to adding up your savings accounts, your checking accounts. We'll talk about retirement accounts, 401ks, stocks, cash, your PayPal, your Venmo, all those things you pull together. If you have $6,000 and you say, I have reached the threshold, now let's see if a year passes. So that's how we're going to start. So somebody owns $6,000. Then you say, do I have $6,000 one lunar year later? Now what's important here, there's differences of opinion. The easy position is don't worry about annual fluctuations. So let's just say you had $6,000 today. Okay, alhamdulillah, you reached the nisab today. And let's say a month later, you had to pay an electricity bill and you dropped to $5,500, whatever it might be. We don't say you reset, your hawl just yet. We would say wait for the entire year, and then if that money goes back up and it comes back down, it goes back up, it comes back down, as long as a year later, lunar year, you have $6,000, then you have met the condition of the hawl. So let's go step by step. Okay, so it's easy to think about cash. It's easy to think about gold. If you have gold bars, if you have silver, you add that together and it has a certain value, you pay on that value, right? So if it's cash, I have $10,000 of cash, it's met the nisab, right? I've had it for a year. It's very easy, pay 2.5%, right? I pay $250 of zakah. But what about all my other accounts? How do I pay zakah on my stocks? How do I pay on my retirement accounts, my pension plans? Each of these is important. So let's start. So shares, the first and most common kind of investment people have is they own stocks, and that can be in the form of individual shares that you own. So someone buys shares of Apple, Google, Tesla, any other company that you want. Now there's two considerations. One, is it halal to invest in that company? That's a separate issue. And then the zakah due on it. So whether the company is halal or haram, you still have to pay zakah on it. So you could be held liable for investing in a haram company, but then you'd be held double liable if you didn't pay zakah on that, right? So again, for shares, Allahu alam, there's different opinions that are out there. The stock market is called a stock market for a reason. Now, most people, when they buy shares of a company, they don't think about themselves as true business owners, right? Anyone here have a share of Tesla or Apple or anything else? Right? Do you feel like you're an owner of those companies? Right? No, right? To you, you are like, look, this is just a commodity that I'm trading. It could be a Pokemon card, right? It could be a baseball card. It could be, orange juice, pork bellies. It's not halal, but it's at the end of the day, we treat this like any other kind of asset of business that you buy and you sell it because of the price that the market gives it. You're not thinking about it like, I'm a business owner and I have this equipment here and I have this rent that I got to pay here, and then you're not running it like a small business owner, like if you had a local like yogurt land or a local restaurant. You'd calculate life very differently, right? So for that reason, right, I am of the opinion that shares are treated like liquid assets, right? Whatever the share value is, right, that is a zakat that you own on it, right? There's a minority of scholars, and some of them who would say that you would pay on a portion of that. If you want to talk about that, we can talk about that later. But I think the safest opinion, because of how shares operate in today's economy, is you pay on the full value of those shares at the end of the year. So if you bought Apple for $1,000 and now it's worth, I don't know the value, it's $2,000, you just pay at the date of after the hawl that I owe on the full value of my shares. Right? Currently, yes. The same would apply for mutual funds. So mutual funds are simply a bucket of what different shares and different assets are put into by some entity. It could be amana or something else. Make sure your mutual funds are Sharia compliant. And the same thing here. If you own that outright, you pay on the full value of the mutual fund. The second, or now we get into more kind of corporation-specific things. RSUs and ESPP. Does anybody own these in their companies? So RSUs refer to restricted stock units. That's when a company will say, I'm giving you shares as part of your compensation. So mostly tech companies do this, but it could be other companies. They say, your salary is $100,000, and also we're going to give you 1,000 RSUs. So that's interesting because the RSUs, anyone have RSUs? So I want to make sure, so I'll go into it. So with RSUs, the company is saying, your salary is proportioned into cash and into shares. But those shares, you don't own them outright all the time. Typically with RSUs, and if you have your own case, you can ask me, is they tell you they vest over time. So your boss would say to you, here's your salary, you're going to get $100,000 and 1,000 shares, but they vest over 4 years. What this means is that today, I don't have that share in my pocket. 1 year later, my company will say, here's 250 of those. The second year, they give me 250 more. The third year, 250 more. The fourth year, 250 more. And then I have those shares. But until I actually have the shares in my pocket, I don't own them, so I don't pay zakat on it. So let's just say again, today, I got a new job. The employer said, here's 1,000 RSUs. Well, 6 months later, if my zakat is due, I don't actually have any shares. Because if I tried to sell them, there's nothing to sell. They're not in my pocket. They're not in my account. So only shares that have vested do you pay on. So if it's, again, 1,000 over 4 years, and 1 year you're into it, you'd only pay on 250. ESPP is when the company is going to give you a discount to purchase the shares of the corporation you work at. That's where they typically will give you some option. It could be the lowest price in a certain interval of time, or it could be 15% off the current price. Again, the same thing here is if once those shares are in your possession, right, and they have vested, then again you would pay on the full value of those. So for all these assets of stocks, again, the opinion is to pay on the current market value without deducting anything from that. The questions on stocks, just before we move on.
For zakat, there are two things. One is your milkiyah, your ownership. And the second thing is accessibility, that you are able to use it. So both of these things are there, then you see what is the current amount of that, and beyond that.
Yeah. Okay, the second thing to go into is the individual retirement accounts that people often have. And this is, the IRA accounts are where people they're responsible for their own retirement. It's not typically employer-based. And so you would put money into the IRA. Sometimes there are certain advantages to doing it for tax reasons, so on and so forth. And again, the same thing here. You would pay the full amount annually of what your IRA is worth. Now, it's true, the IRA comes with certain restrictions, perhaps, on withdrawals, right? Now, the opinions here, they vary. There's two ways to think about it, and the same would apply to 401k, but I want us to appreciate the fact that this is a voluntary choice. This is really important. Because there's some retirement accounts you have no choice in, like a pension. You can't tell your employer, I don't want this, I want actually cash in hand. It's no, you work here, this money is going into a pension fund, right? With the IRA, you're getting cash in hand, then you're taking that cash and putting it into an account that has its own restrictions because it has certain perks that you want. So in this case, the opinion is if your money is growing, in that IRA account, you pay on the full value of the IRA without subtracting anything. The only time you subtract something is if you actually need to subtract it to pay. So what do I mean by that? Let's say someone had $10,000 in their IRA and they had no cash at all. They owe $250 of zakah, right? Someone's like, I don't have $250. So now I got to sell part of what's in my IRA account in order for me to pay the $250. If you have to withdraw money from your IRA, and that's now subject to some penalties for early withdrawal, then you can subtract that. Because now you've paid a penalty and that money is actually no longer in your possession. So whatever, let's just say it went down from 10,000 to 9,500 because you had to pull out some money and they taxed you, I don't know if it's 10%. So now you've lost, whatever it is, $500, whatever it might be. So you can only subtract in the case of realizing that actual loss. So now we move to 401k. And it's going to be a very similar position that I hold on this. And I'll share with you a few of the opinions. So the 401k is an employer-based program. And the idea is the government doesn't want to help you for your retirement. So they want to pass the buck to your employer, right? And so they say to the employer, hey, you know what? Tell this employee to save and sweeten the pot for them a few ways. So one is we'll make it pre-taxed on a traditional 401k. Also, the company is often matching a certain percentage of your contributions. So there's a lot of perks. So you get pre-taxed contributions. So the dollar you put in is worth more, right? It could be worth 10%, 20%, whatever your tax rate is. Also, the employer is matching. So maybe, let's say, in your case, you put in, 3% or 5%, and your employer is matching it. So you've put in $5,000, your owner matched $5,000. Now you have $10,000, right? So there's perks to doing it. Now, the issue that comes up, the 401k is probably the most tricky thing in the United States to understand from a zakat perspective. The reason is because it is kind of in this hybrid station of ownership. And there's many, many opinions on it. Now again, let's distill it to its essence. This is a choice. One is choosing that I want to save for my retirement using this investment vehicle. Because you could have done something else. What could you have done? I could have taken my money and put it under my mattress. That's one option. Probably a bad choice because, again, there's no growth in it, right? It's just going to be subject to losses over time, inflation, so on and so forth. Or I could take the money and I can put it in the stock market. But people don't want to do that because they said, well, it's post-taxed, and post-tax, it's already lost some money, right? And then again, no one else is adding to the pot. So 401k, the reason why someone is doing it is they're looking for all of these perks that make it more and more desirable. And the same thing I mentioned on stocks, make sure your 401k is halal. This is not like trivial. It's not trivial. Again, this is your retirement that you're going to live on from, inshallah, your old age. Make sure that the 401k that your company is offering you is permissible, which means the assets within them are permissible, right? They're not investing in companies that are haram, have a number of bonds, all these other types of things. And if they do, there's certain ways we might have to purify that wealth. So there's a couple opinions. So one of them is, and this is the position I hold, anything that is fully vested in your 401k, because again, vesting applies. Sometimes a corporation says, well, match for you, but it takes time. So if we've put in $5,000, you cannot quit right away and take that 401k with you. So it takes time to vest. Whatever is vested is fully yours. My opinion, and many other scholars in Southern California, is you pay on the full amount of vested assets. That's the first opinion. Why? Because you own the wealth, you are choosing to have it in that account, and it is growing. And so some of the conditions of wealth that is zakatable is that it is liable to grow. Liable to grow. It doesn't have to grow. So in this case, the wealth is liable to grow, and you are benefiting from it. How are you benefiting? You've chosen that I want this money in this account because I want it to grow for my retirement. So that's the benefit. The benefit is long-term financial security, right? The second opinion that the Fiqh Council of North America and AMJA give is that you may subtract your penalties and your taxes. And the logic that those organizations give is that today, if my 401k is worth $100,000, and I wanted to go and spend my 401k, I couldn't do that. So how much would I actually have in my pocket if today I wanted to go and buy a new car, right? Or want to go put it for a down payment on my house? Well, you would be subject, number one, to a 10% penalty. So if you pulled out at $100,000, the government would say, I need $10,000 of that as a penalty for your early withdrawal. So now you have only $90,000. Now you take that $90,000 and you add it to your normal income. Let's just say your income was $100,000. So now you have $190,000 of income. Now, when you pay taxes, what tax bracket are you going to fall into? Let's just say it was 25%, right? So now you're going to actually take 25% out of that $90,000. And so again, now you're left with 70-some thousand dollars in this case, right? So in this example, you would now have to pay zakat on that leftover portion, right? After 10% and after your taxes, right? I know some people make exaggerated claims. They say you take out half of it because 10% plus a maximum tax rate of 40%. This is not accurate because first of all, nobody pays the full 40% in taxes, and it's not realistic. The other reason why I find this position to not also make sense is that even if you have to withdraw, right? Typically, you should say what do you have to withdraw to pay your zakat on. So it makes more sense, in my opinion, to say, well, I had $100,000 in zakat of 401k, and I have to pay my zakat on it. It's $2,500, right? So I'll show you the examples. So only if you had to pull out of your 401k can you say that those penalties and taxes may apply. And so I'll go through that in more detail. I'll quickly move to pension. So for the pension, according to the typical pensions that people have in certain government sectors, that no one has to pay zakat until they actually begin receiving income on it, because you don't have access to that wealth at any point in time. You cannot pull it out. It is completely out of your hands until a certain point in time in history. Once you can receive that income, you now treat that as ordinary income that is just gets put into your normal asset classes, right? So, yes, sister, question. Yeah, good question. So trust funds are a little bit different. So this is a trust for like a child as an example, or an adult, okay? So the idea here is if somebody has a trust fund and they have access to that trust, then it's fully liable to pay zakat on. So if my parents have given me, $1 million in my trust, but I can pull out that money anytime I want to, well, I have to pay zakat on the $1 million that I have in my trust, right? If there are certain restrictions, there's things we can speak about, right? So let's quickly walk through the 401k just to give you like some really detailed stuff, because I know it's tricky. And I'm going to be speaking here. I'm going to put my hat on as not a financial advisor. I'm wearing the cap of the faqih. So there's a difference. There's something that's fiqh, I believe is the right thing to do or the safe thing to do, something that is financially maybe the best thing for you to do. They don't always intersect, so you can do what you want. So let's just be clear. So alhamdulillah, today we have a different type of a 401k, and that is called a Roth 401k. So I want to talk about both of these. Anyone's company offer them a Roth 401k? Nobody? If you don't, no, you should ask your company, because actually it is important. What is the difference? In the traditional 401k, when you put money into your retirement account, it is coming out pre-tax, right? So the government has not yet skimped anything off. The full dollar goes right into the retirement account. Now, in this case, what ends up happening is the contributions are subtracted from your taxable income for the year. So again, this year you made $100,000, but you put $5,000 in your 401k. So the government says you're only liable to paying $95,000 of income tax, right? Now what happens is when you're 59 and a half years old, you can begin to withdraw. And what you withdraw, you pay the nominal tax rate on. So if I withdrew, let's say I retired at 60 years old, and I'm getting no income, but I'm pulling from my 401k. Let's say I pulled $100,000 a year from my 401k. How much do I pay in taxes? Anyone know? It's not nothing, it's your nominal tax rate. So now when you report and you do your taxes, you'd say my income was $100,000. And my dependents and my liability, all the standard things you do in taxes. So probably you're going to pay 10%, 15%. It depends on how many kids you have. It depends on whether you have a mortgage. It depends on so many factors that the tax code is going to figure out. So the point I'm making here is that it is variable. You have no idea what percent of tax you're going to pay when you retire. It could be 0. It could be 40%. How could it be 40%? If someone retired and said, now I have $5 million in my 401k, I want to pull it out, and I want to buy a home on the beach. So if you pull out that $5 million, the government's going to tax you on $5 million of income, so you're going to pay probably $2 million of that or something to the government. So now you're going to have only $3 million. So you could be paying 0, and you could be paying 40%. Huge variability. So I want you to think about how you plan to spend your retirement. Some people say I'm going to rent forever and then buy a home in my retirement. Some say I own my home, I'm just going to pull out $5,000 a month for my living. This matters because it's going to affect your liability. So I want to say a couple of things that are important because they're misunderstood. People think that you can't touch your 401k. It's not true. you can touch your 401k. There's 2 or 3 ways you can do it. One of them is the government allows you to give yourself a loan. So you're allowed to give yourself a loan, but they like to discourage you, because if you could take out a loan on yourself, it would be people would say, I'll keep borrowing money for myself, right? So the government says, no. When you take out a loan from yourself and they give you up to $50,000, you have to pay yourself back in interest, okay? This is not interest from the Islamic sense. So imagine I pulled out $1,000 and the government said you got to pay yourself back $1,100. Okay, I can do that, right? They're only doing that to kind of disincentivize you to withdraw from your 401k, because they don't want you to have to pull out welfare in the future. That's the reason why. Right? Now, this is important because if someone had to pull out money for their zakah, you don't have to pay a penalty, and you don't have to pay, this exorbitant taxes on it. You can take a loan out of your 401k if you had to pay your zakah on it, and then you can pay yourself back later on if you had to, right? The second thing is when you're older, you can also roll your 401k over into an IRA, again, and not see some of those tax liabilities. So I'm saying all of this to get people out of the worst case scenario, which is, oh my God, 50% of my money is going to be taken away. Let's reduce 50% of my liabilities, right? That's not accurate, in my opinion. Now, why am I advocating that you consider the Roth 401k? The reason I advocate for the Roth, and the difference between Roth is post-tax. So the government took 25 cents out of my dollar, and I was able to put 75 cents now into my 401k this year. But here's what ends up happening. I will never pay tax on that ever again. So if I pay zakat on my Roth today, I have paid the exact amount that I owe with no ambiguity. It's not more, it's not less. With a traditional 401k, you might be paying more, you might be paying less because you have no idea what your liabilities are going to be. So the financial advisor tells you, if you make more, if you're in a higher tax bracket today than you will be in the future, then you should have a traditional 401k, right? They say because your tax liability right now is greater, so you want to reduce that, and in the future, right, you'll be in a lower tax bracket, and so you're going to get that advantage. The Roth 401k is flipped. If you're actually in a lower bracket today than you're going to be in the future, the Roth is better for you financially. I'm only going to say zakah-wise, Roth is easier. Again, I don't know what's good for your dunya. All I know is what's good for your akhirah. And the safety of it is Roth, you have zero ambiguity, right? No penalty, right? Yeah, because you've already paid the tax. Your tax has already been paid, right? And so you can usually withdraw your own contributions, right, after a period of time. So again, there's less, you're less stuck in this thing, right? So again, I say all of this to tell people, if you want to put yourself in a investment vehicle that's going to limit your access, that's your choice. But it's your choice. Like if imagine I told Dr. Muzammil, say, Dr. Muzammil, I trust you a lot. I don't trust myself with my retirement money. I'm going to start spending it. Dr. Muzammil, take my retirement money and don't let me have it until I'm 60 years old. And now I tell you guys, you know what? I'm not liable to pay zakah because I don't have access to my money. Who would think that's reasonable? Nobody, right? But why do we do that with 401k? Because Charles Schwab has my money? So now it's okay because I can't touch it. Charles Schwab won't let me touch it. Like, you told Charles Schwab not to give it to you, right? So you have chosen this, and you are gaining all the benefits of it. So when do you deduct from your 401k? Only if you realize those penalties and taxes. So let's go through a scenario. So this only applies if you have about $2 million in your 401k, okay? Because below that, you wouldn't be subject to this, and I can explain why. Also, if you have no cash on hand, this may be a consideration, okay? So if you have $100,000 in your 401k, what this means is that you owe $2,500 if we take our nominal rate of 2.5%. So now you have a few choices. Either you pay it from your checking account, or you pay it from some other account you have, you find $2,500, and you pay your zakah, and you're done, okay? But if you had no cash at all your money was in your 401k, and there's people like this in our community, they live check to check, all the money is in the retirement account. Well, guess what? You still have to pay. So you would have to withdraw from your 401k, but you don't withdraw $100,000. You would say, well, I have to withdraw, probably I owe $2,500. So if you withdrew $3,000, you would pay a 10% penalty, just assuming. So again, why do I say $2 million plus typically? Under $2 million, your zakah is less than $50,000. And so you can give yourself a loan. So you wouldn't be in this scenario. But if you're at that high level, let's just take this example. You would pay 10% of a penalty, so you lose $300. And then you'd pay, let's just say, about 20% in taxes on the remainder. That's $540, right? So in this scenario, your zakah liability has dropped from 100,000 to 99,160. And then now you would, instead of owing 2,500, you owe $2,479 on your zakah. But so the point I'm making is, it's actually very minimal. How much money did I save in zakah by subtracting my taxes and penalty? How much? $21, right? It's not worth the headache, guys. Right? It's not. Just, again, have yaqeen that Allah will bless your wealth if you do what's right. I've had nobody ever come to me in 10 plus years of doing this say, Sheikh, I'm broke now, right? Because again, you have $1 million and you owe $2,500, right? Or $25,000, I'm sorry. So if you had $1 million in your 401k, you owe $25,000. But your 401k is growing more than 2.5% a year typically, right? So alhamdulillah, if you had to pay $25,000 in zakat on it, alhamdulillah. And inshallah, next year you have to pay $30,000. Hopefully next year you have to pay $40,000. That means your money is growing. That means your money is growing at an extent that's very good, right? So I want to stop, make sure we have no questions on this topic, because this is what takes people hours, right? We're good? Okay, alhamdulillah. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. It does. Yeah, jazakumullah khair. So the question is, so this is a very specific scenario. So I want to talk to two groups of people quickly. First group, I'm going to speak to you if you don't have millions of dollars in your 401k. If you're young and you're starting your career, what you're supposed to do, my advice, is make sure that you put money into your investments and you keep liquid assets available. It's just smart. So, okay, alhamdulillah, I have $10,000 in my 401k. I've also got cash on hand, so I don't have to dip into it. That's a smart thing to do. Your scenario is where someone didn't know this, and now they're in their 40s or their 50s and their 60s. They say, oh my God, I have $3-4 million in my 401k. Like, how am I going to pay, $50,000 in zakah, right? Here, we can talk offline. We can talk about how do you do this after you retire. But that's a correction and an exception. It's not the normative rule. And this position comes up because there's a minority position that says you don't have to pay on your 401k until you retire. But there's a big problem with this. First, I will say this, and they split this opinion into two. One say you have to pay on every single year. So you started saving at 25, and now you're 60. So you've got 35 years of zakah you owe. Now every single year, year one, maybe it was 2,000, year two, it was 3,000, year four, and then it's 40,000, 50,000, 60,000. That lump sum, when you retire, you got to pay like $500,000 in zakah. That's a huge fitna to somebody's deen, right? So I think that's just a very dangerous proposition to be in, and it's a debt over your shoulder. So this is one of the opinions, right? Clarify? No, yeah.
I'm not looking to defer if I adopt.
Yeah, I get that.
I'm
Yeah.
talking about past years when I do change my opinion. What do I do in that case? And I'm not.
Yeah. I would just say start from this year. Yeah, because if you adopt a new position, you're not liable to a previous position, especially if that position was from a respected scholar. So we're not here to nitpick and say someone's wrong or right. It's just what your heart believes, you start practicing that today, and you just go with that, inshallah, right? So we can talk offline for the details, right? Okay, so I want to quickly, I know we only have about 15 minutes before Q&A. So, question, yeah.
If somebody has the non-Sharia compliant by the employer, in that scenario, for example, the vested amount is 10K.
Yeah.
Just an example, employee and employer is vested amount is about 10K. And the account full value is about 15,000K.
Okay.
So the zakat will be on 10K or the 15K. In consideration that the person having the 15K, he will purify the money by giving the sadaqah without intention of reward. That is the one of the way of purification. So that additional 5,000. So zakat will be on the 15K or only the 10K with the person considering that is his own money. The additional 5,000 he will, once he will withdraw the 401k,
Yeah.
he will give like a sadaqah without intention of the reward.
Okay, jazakumullah khair. So there's two things here. So one is, again, the question is, imagine that part of that wealth was not halal, right? Because they know that, in this case, let's just say a third of the wealth was bonds, as an example. It's probably not realistic, but let's just say it was. So that money is haram for me to take in its totality. But it's in my account. So what I'm going to do is when I have a chance from that $15,000, I only own 10,000 of it. 5,000 of it actually I can't take ownership of it. So in this case, you would say that 5,000, I'm going to donate it completely, because it's not like zakat, it's not even something you're rewarded for, right? It's just something you have to purify. Then you'd say I have 10,000 left. Now you pay zakat on the 10,000. Yeah, you don't want to get double hit, right? So, okay, jewelry, really fast.
And that money can be given to poor Muslims as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be given to somebody who's from not in Islamic faith.
Yeah,
not to masjid. Don't give it to masjid.
Okay, so for jewelry, we're going to separate really fast. If your jewelry is for business purposes, then again, the three of the madhahib consider it part of your zakatable. If it's for business purposes, everyone agrees that it's liable for zakat. This would be if somebody sold jewelry online, they have an eBay marketplace, something else, or jewelry store. So you would pay on the value of that merchandise, right? If it's gold, right? You have to take that into consideration, or if it's silver. The intention in this case is if the intention is to make money, now you have to pay on it, right? And utensils and cups that are gold as well, like pure gold, they're actually haram to own and use, but you still have to pay zakat on that, right? The second side where no zakat is due is, again, personal jewelry that is worn by women for adornment. So again, you got wedding jewelry and you wear it once in a while to a wedding or a party. Again, three madhahib say you do not have to pay zakat on that, but the Hanafis say you have to pay zakat on it. So again, I will just say, if you're a Hanafi and you've been paying on your jewelry and you have no problem with it, by all means pay on it, right? But again, 3/4 of the madhahib would say that is not liable, because again, it is no longer considered as a growth asset. It's not considered as wealth. It's because you don't care whether that is worth $1,000 or $100,000. It's sentimental, it is a gift, it is adornment, it is a family heirloom. But if the intention ever changed, so imagine someone had this expensive jewelry and they wore it every year to their dawats and their shadis, and then one year they're like, wait a minute, this is actually worth a whole lot now. I want to sell it. Once the niyyah becomes business, then it becomes liable to paying zakat on. So if it's worth a lot of money, you have to pay 2.5% again on that. So, questions? Yeah. Nope. That's okay. Personal use, there's no zakat on it. If you have a Rolex watch you like to wear to your dawats, no zakat on it. No, even the Hanafis wouldn't say you have to. Hanafis, it's gold and silver. So your Rolex watch is not gold or silver, hopefully, right? Yeah. So, questions on the? And again, part of the logic that some of the scholars they have about this is that, like, if a sister had gold, imagine you had a set of gold, right? And you're not working, especially, right? Okay, like you have the nice necklace set, you got the earrings. It's like year one, you break off a piece of it. It's difficult, right, to separate, this type of an asset. So again, for the Hanafis, you would just pay the value of it, right? The weight, right, of the gold, you would weigh it, right? And you'd say, well, what does that come out to, right? And and I'll pay 2.5% again of the value of that, right? So.
And even those who are Hanafis, if the women have some jewelry, husband can pay for them.
Yeah.
Husband can pay zakat for that.
Assalamu alaikum. In time is running, we need to know who actually entitled to get the zakat. That's the most important.
Almost there, inshallah. Okay. Business, really fast. So what do you have to pay if you own a business? You have to pay on your merchandise or your inventory, and that could be raw materials or otherwise. If you had like wood or metal or any other cotton, that is liable. It's part of your assets. And any accounts that you have. What you don't pay on is any fixed assets. So you had to buy equipment, furniture, the facility. Anything that's fixed in this case, you don't pay on. The issue of account receivables and payables, there's a lot of opinions on it. Some scholars say, consider all your account receivables, deduct all your account payables. I personally have changed my opinion over the years. I think just do what you have in hand at the moment, because it's just easier to calculate. Because you don't have to worry about, did someone default, did they not default? Like, so, what you have in your hand at that moment in your company, likely there's money that's going to come out, there's money that's going to come in. Just deal with it on your strike date, whatever day you pay zakat on. Take your whatever you own from your business and you pay zakat on it. The only thing I'll add is just be careful not to be like, I know there's people who will then, as a possibility of kind of deception, where, for instance, they will have a whole lot of, let's say, account receivables that are supposed to come in that they're not liable for, and so they've kind of set up their zakat at a time where it's like it minimizes their liabilities. Right? We don't want to do that, right? Real estate. To be honest, real estate is probably the hardest thing to speak about. I don't feel comfortable with the current opinions, but they are what they are. Question? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I'm saying don't worry about that. Like, you don't want to worry about saying, hey, you know what? I got these 10 customers that owe me, this much money over the next 30 days, and I also owe these other customers money over the next 30 days. Just do it with what's there in the moment in time. Let those account, because likely they're going to cancel each other out to a certain extent. That's okay, because it's just at that moment in time. Because again, there's some ambiguity. You don't know if that account receivables is going to be actually received, right? People. Say it one more time. Yeah. I would say pay it on the 100 because you haven't actually paid it out yet, right? It's owed, but someone also is probably going to owe you, and you probably have these receivables. So I'm saying these doors are coming in and out. They likely cancel each other out. You can make your life easy. If someone is elaborate at accounting, by all means, you're welcome to take all your receivables and all your payables as well. So both opinions are valid. I was just trying to make life easy because I know that it can be very cumbersome to do this. And then there's formulas to calculate what's the likelihood of it being paid off, because some people, they have customers that will pay, some people are customers who won't pay. There's all kinds of ambiguities in that as well, right? So if you have that question, we can speak privately, inshallah. Real estate, the general opinion that's out there is that, again, if it's for business reasons, like you're flipping houses, you own those houses, right? You are liable to paying on the value of those houses. But if it's rental income, then the dominant position to this day is simply you take the rental income and you count that as part of your ordinary income and you pay on it. And you don't pay on property that you either live in or it has a non-business intention. So maybe land you've purchased, you want to build a home on it, but you're still saving up money, but it's got a residential or personal niyyah behind it, right?
With the rental income, you can deduct taxes, other repair expenses,
Yeah.
anything that you have, you can deduct that. And then whatever is your real income.
Yeah, so if you're getting every month, let's just say, $5,000 of rental income, it's $60,000 in the year, but you have to pay property tax from that, you have to pay, all kinds of other things. Whatever at the end you have just becomes part of your total zakat liabilities, right? I will be honest, I feel like especially with like California and certain other places, real estate has become very strange. Be mindful though, I feel like real estate could become a zakat shelter. So just make sure that you're not buying real estate to avoid zakat liabilities, right? Because again, $1 million home, someone says, I'm going to buy a house and just rent it out, right? Now, essentially, because now you don't have to pay $25,000 a year in zakat, right? So just be mindful of what your niyyah is. And if your niyyah changes again to wanting to sell that home, then it switches to the full liability on the house, right? So, yes? No zakah. Nope. You're welcome to have multiple homes. As long as they're personal residences, there's no zakat on them, right? The only consideration there, again, is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran, is that be moderate. If the person's consumption of personal things like cars and homes makes them unable to now give, Allah can hold you accountable for that, right? Because we have these scenarios. We know people who make hundreds of thousands of dollars annually who never pay zakat because they just live very, very large. So they're always buying new cars, they're always buying new furniture, they're always buying new things. So actually never have even the nisab. This is blameworthy, right? So, okay, I'm going to skip livestock and grazing unless there's, let's quickly questions. Yes, sister. It's just rental income, correct? Yes. Yes, but in which way? So that business, what are you doing with it? If are you're renting it out to somebody else, or you're using it for your own business? Yeah, if you're using it for your own business, that's going to be a fixed asset. So you can deduct, for instance, if there's any investment that goes into that. You don't have to pay on the value of that space. Yeah, because you're not. That's not growing. That's not like. Yeah. You don't have to worry about that. Yeah. 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 No, you would. So in this case, you have to pay off the loan, right? So you have to give back the government, or whoever the entity, the debtor is. And so now you have 300,000 left. That goes into your total assets. Now, if you use that to buy another home, you don't have to pay any zakat on it. But if that money is just sitting as profit in your bank account, when your hawl comes about, you got to count the $300,000. Okay, so just really quick, just to show you, I won't go into the details, but just so you understand it visually. So 2.5% was the rate for cash money accounts. For livestock, it's different. So again, if somebody owned 30 cows or buffaloes, right, you would pay one-year-old buffalo, right, or cow as a zakah. So again, that's not 2.5%. Right? And for sheep and for goats, in this case, you had 40 of them, you would pay one of those, right? So if that doesn't apply to you, we can move on. Agriculture is another thing. Also, the nisab is different. It's no longer just a dollar amount. It's kilograms. It's weight. So it's 600 kilograms worth of that agricultural produce. There's no hawl because you don't want to hold 600 kilograms of apple for a year, right? It's going to go, unless maybe Cosmic Crisp it'll last, right? But generally, right, these fruits and vegetables don't last. So you actually pay on the day of the harvest, as Allah says in the Quran, right? وَآتُوا حَقَّهُ يَوْمَ حَصَادِهِ. So if you have 600 kilograms of an asset class of agriculture. So when I say an asset class, like you can add grains together, right? You can add, like if you have apples, you add all different apples together. You don't say each variety is different. Then you would pay either 5% or 10%. You'd pay 10% if you incur no irrigation cost. In other words, the rain is, or a local river, there's no water that you've incurred cost, then you would pay 10%. But if you have to pay the cost of irrigation, you pay 5%. So that's for agricultural produce, right? So now we get into the question, and we'll try to wrap it up soon. Who gets zakah? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala delineates in the Quran 8 categories. In Surah At-Tawbah, He says, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَفِي الرِّقَابِ وَالْغَارِمِينَ وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ فَرِيضَةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ حَكِيمٌ. So let's walk through these 8 predefined categories that Allah tells us about. So the first 2 are very similar, the poor and the needy. And I also want to just remind us the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ are almost always emphasizing the poor and the needy as a primary recipients of zakah. These other categories are there, but they're, I don't want to say special circumstances, but they kind of follow along from that need. So the scholars, they differ. Some say the poor and needy, there's a slight distinction. The faqir, right, versus the miskeen, who is he? Some say the faqir is the one who has nothing, maybe like a homeless person as an example. No home, no job, right? Versus the miskeen is needy. Maybe they have a home, but they don't have enough money for food, or they don't have enough money for their electric bill or their water bill. The point is, poor and needy are the primary categories that deserve our zakah. Yes? Yes, has to be a Muslim. I know. There's one scholar who's respected, I know, who permits it for non-Muslims. The vast majority of ulama in Islamic history have said zakah is only for Muslims. So I would say we stick with that opinion, right? Your sadaqat for the non-Muslims, no problem, right? So the third category would be the employees of zakat collection. Now this is again important historically. In Islamic history, it was common for the state, the khilafah, right, to have employees whose job was to go to people's farms and to go to people's, to go to these places and to actually do a count. oh, you have a farm of animals. Let me go and let's do a count and you give us, like what you need. Or you have agricultural produce, right? We'll come and we'll drive to your farms like during the harvest season and we'll take some of that and we'll distribute it, right? So there's people employed to collect those assets. We don't have that today, right? Inshallah, we'll have it in the near future, right? May Allah bring back, that Islamic state that does this. But here we don't have that. We don't have a state, right? Let me finish and then come back to me, right? So right now what we have is, and so this is important because even when it came historically, people would not go into people's bank accounts. Like the Islamic State wouldn't go into your bank account and be like, take your cash, and you would give that cash on your own accord, right, to the poor in your community. Today, there are individuals and there's organizations who want to then distribute zakah, right? And so they're doing that voluntarily, right? And they're not doing that as any sort of representatives of the state. It's like an IRS job, right? If the IRS is being paid by the government, right, they're an IRS employee, they're getting money to collect taxes, right? But if I come around and say, let me collect taxes from you guys, like I can't take a salary for that, right? So the opinion of many of the scholars is that we do not when you give money, try to give it to an organization that doesn't take overhead for their zakah. That's the preferred opinion, because this way you know that every dollar you give is getting to the poor. The dilemma we have today, again, just to give a little bit, it's good to make the examples direct. Imagine that I came to you, and
make a distinction between عاملين عليها and عاملين لها. This is organizations. عاملين عليها are the people who are authorized to determine your zakat. They go and check it and tell you that you have to give this much. Nobody employed by any charitable organization and does that. They only collect whatever you give yourself. So they are not appointed to collect. They are just helping the organization in that.
Yeah.
So they are workers for the organization. And if they are paid by the organization, they are paid like any other servant, any other workers that they pay.
Yeah, so to give that example more explicitly, so imagine I give the seminar and then I say, I know a lot of poor people, so why don't you guys all give me your zakah and I'll go give it to the poor people in the community. But I'm going to take a cut from that. How many of you would feel comfortable in giving me your zakah? You say, no, like I can go give it to the poor people too, right? I don't need you as a middleman to do that, right? So the best opinion is give it to these organizations that guarantee 100% they're going to transfer the zakat over, but then give those organizations sadaqah to cover their overhead. Because they need sadaqat in order to cover that overhead. How do they pay their employees, right? Like it has got to come from somewhere. So if you give to local charity, right, please give sadaqah as well as to give zakah. And then also, the masajid, right, will also collect zakah, and then their staff that's being paid through sadaqat will then distribute that as well. So make sure that you can try to give it to those organizations, because or else really it's quite egregious. Sometimes organizations are taking 10, 20, 30, 40%. America is notorious for bad nonprofits in terms of the dollar that goes to the needy. So you want to just cut that out if you can. Which is why it's important, honestly. Some of the ulama, especially when it comes to things like zakat al-fitr, are actually very strict. They say, go and give it in hand. One of the wisdoms why they say this is it's important for us to be connected to poor people. Right? The fact that you live a life where you don't know a poor person is a little bit of an indictment about your lifestyle and your social circle, right? That you are only in a certain group of people. So if you can go to those communities in hand and give it to them, that is very easy. It eliminates, again, that unnecessary lack of efficiency that occurs when we have mega organizations who take the zakah, have gigantic galas and banquets that cost massive overhead, right? And then it gets transferred over. So, yes. Yeah, the local one that I know that does this very well is Uplift Charity does it very well. I know, I believe Sabil in Irvine does this well. There's a CAP program out of some of these masajid. Of course, the masjid here will do that. So usually smaller organizations can do that because their overhead is lower, right? And they're not dependent on the types of mechanisms to raise money. So try to find those organizations. Yes, sister. That's not zakah eligible. Yeah, but they're not giving money to the Muslims. So you're not giving your zakah to the, what is it? Yeah, yes. I don't know Helping Hands. I don't know about their overhead policy. So it's you ask. It's your job to make sure your zakah is going to the right people. So you can call and you can ask and say, does 100% of my zakah go to the poor? Or do you take overhead? And if they take overhead and you want to give it to them, just make sure you give enough sadaqah that covers that portion, right? So, yes, brother. Jazakallah khair. All right. Okay, so let's go through this quick. I know we're over time, so I'll go fast. Okay, so the fourth category is mu'allafat al-qulub, and that was used historically by the Islamic State as well to strategically give it in places that would be beneficial to the state of Islam. So it could be to get people to come closer to Islam, right, who are on the verge of converting, but there are certain impediments. So giving zakat to those tribes would bring them closer to Islam. It could be used to repel harm, where there's a tribe that's very hostile towards Islam. And through giving them a gift of zakah, they would reduce their hostility. And that, again, is a net benefit to the society. So there are circumstances where that can be used. It's, again, typically state administered. There are some circumstances where I could see it being applied today. Like there's cases where you have a convert who someone wants to convert, but if they convert, they will, let's say their parents will cut them off, right? And so zakat in this case can be used to support them so they can come into Islam and feel like they have that security. The fifth category is freeing slaves and captives. Again, this could be prisoners of war, anyone else who's stuck in a predicament that they could be taken out of. The sixth is those who are in debt, and this refers to people who are in genuine debt. So again, not paying off someone's mortgage, right? That I have $1 million mortgage, give me zakah, right? But no, it's like, someone has a small loan, right? That loan they defaulted on, right? And to help them take care of that so they can move on with their life expenses. Then you have the big category we can talk about for ages is Sabilillah. It's the most disputed category. Some of the councils have opened up the meaning of that to allow it for certain other endeavors. But traditionally, it was meant to mean jihad and the physical defense of Islam and Muslims. And some madhahib would say that applies to Hajj as well, so pay to someone who's poor to go on a literal path to Allah, like the Hanbalis. I will caution again, it's a big pet peeve of mine, I have papers written on it if you want to look into it, that Allah purposely said there was 8 categories. He didn't just say that zakah is fi sabilillah, and he could have said that. And then you could give zakah to whatever you want. So, bluntly, it doesn't make sense to be like, well, all good causes are zakah eligible. Let me give it to the local Islamic school. Let me give it to the local, this organization, that organization, and the local masjid. And by the way, some people do it for masjid. I know Dr. Muzammil and I, we're very clear on this. The masjid is not a place. You don't want to give zakah to yourself. So I love coming to the masjid, and if I give zakah to the masjid, I'm giving zakah to myself. This is forbidden. So I know there's opinions that are out there. I find them to be incredibly odd and strange that you give zakat to organizations that you are the direct beneficiary of. So please try and restrict sabilillah. There's some flexibility, of course, here and there, but it doesn't mean anything good you can give zakat for. And the last category to briefly mention is those who have wealth but may have no access to it.
And the needy, these are the priority. And if there is some area where people are poor and needy, most of the people are poor and needy, and they have a masjid there, or they need a masjid, then in that case, zakat can be given to that area. Even though zakat should not be given for building the masjid, but because they are poor people, mostly poor people will be using that. And they have no hospital, they have no school, or they have no masjid. So in that case, they can be given from that. And this for fi sabilillah.
All right, the last category to mention again is a stranded traveler. And this would be like if you're traveling and you lost your wallet, essentially, right? You're wealthy back home, but you've lost your wallet, you don't have your passport, you're somewhere and you need some money. You could actually take zakah money in this case, right? So it's about this idea that you could have wealth, but you currently don't have access to it, so one could use zakah for those purposes. So I want to quickly move through. So what do we do? Now we know who gets it. How do we give it to them? There's some things to consider. Number one is there's a strong preference in Islamic law, all the madhahib, about giving it locally when possible. So the reason why is we generate the money here, we live here, and we have obligations with the poor closest to us. So please try to give as much of your zakah locally as possible. I do believe, especially with today, what's happening in Gaza and other parts of the Muslim world, where there's dire circumstances where, for instance, there's no rich people in Gaza to give zakah back to other people in Gaza, right, or in these places. If one wants to give it to those circumstances, they can. But try it in your heart to say, first and foremost, I want to give it to my community, and then if a portion of it, maybe I give to other places. Second, prioritize family members that are genuinely in need. So if you have brothers and you have sisters and you have aunts and you have uncles, cousins who are poor, they're both poor and they're your family. So they get the precedence, the priority. But you cannot give it to people who are directly above you in lineage or directly below you. So you cannot give zakat to your poor parents or your poor grandparents or your poor children, right? But it can be someone who's kind of parallel. So aunts, uncles, cousins are fine. So again, give it, like we said, to the poor first. Give it to an organization that promises 100%. Give it immediately. Try not to delay. And it is okay, again, to give it early if you need to. So again, if there was some circumstance like a disaster, and you say, my zakah is not due till next month or 6 months, you could actually pay your zakah early and just count that in advance. A couple other things that are important. Zakah is charity, and people know that it is, human beings have dignity, right? And there's so many ayat in the Quran about this. Even people who wanted to, who wanted to fight for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jalla and who didn't have anything, right? And people have that dignity, and the Prophet ﷺ in the Quran talks about, like, don't strip that dignity from people, right? That Allah says there's people who don't ask, right? Because they have that dignity and they're in genuine need. So you don't have to tell the person that you're giving money to that it's zakah money if you know they're eligible. So you have a poor person in the community, you have a poor relative. You can just give them a gift, and in your niyyah is zakah, but they have no idea that it's zakah, because if they knew it was zakah, they might reject it, for instance, right? It can be given incrementally if necessary. So you might say, okay, I owe $10,000 of zakah this year. I know someone who needs it, but if I gave them $10,000, they may not use it well. Rather, I'll, let's say, pay their rent, for the next, every month I'll give them $1,000 as an example, right? The recipient generally should be in control of that zakah. So, it's not strings attached. And then the last thing I want to say is, please don't give zakah to able-bodied people who don't want to work. This is actually common, especially in recessions. So you do have people who are lost their jobs. It's very common. Middle, upper class people. I've dealt with this many cases. Brothers in IT, they come to me, Sheikh, I lost my job. Can I have some zakah money, right? I said, what's going on? And I said, well, have you been unable to find a job? And it's like, well, I've gotten offers, but they're not what I wanted, so I've turned them down. So I've dealt with these real cases, right? Because people, again, have their dignity, so it's like, well, I'm not going to accept. I used to make $120,000 a year. Well, now that it's a recession, I've been offered 100. I'm not going to go down, so I'll keep rejecting those jobs till I get the job that's going to give me what I want. I'd say, I've told this to people, I said, go bag groceries, and when you show me that you're working hard, and go drive Uber, do anything you have to do to make ends meet, then whatever's left over we can give. So someone has to exert their effort, and then they can collect zakah right after that. Last couple of things. I know let's just we'll end on this. I like to make people dream, because I think that sometimes we get bogged down in our personal lives. And I've done this over a number of years, and every time I do it, people tell me you're underestimating, but it's okay, because that means it's even greater. Just think about how many Muslims live in Southern California, right? California is one of the most densely populated Muslim regions in America. And I did this projection. So if we assumed that there was, 5,000 people in our community, right, who had $50,000 of zakah liability, right? That's reasonable, right? Think of all of Southern California, right? There are 5,000 Muslims maybe who have $50,000 of zakah liability. I think that's not a problem. Those people would generate about $6 million of zakah just amongst them. If we said there's 3,000 people who had $100,000 of zakah liability, we would generate $7.5 million, right? If you just go down this list, there's 2,000 people with $500,000, right? If we went through this, and by the way, I know people in the community who are worth more than $50 billion, so I know I'm underestimating here. But just in my calculation here, we would easily have about $100 million of zakah in Southern California, right? Easily, right? Would we have any poor people in this case? Probably not, right? So just if the Muslims of Southern California were put their heads together, paid zakah properly, we would likely be able to alleviate just our own local poverty, right? No poor Muslims in Garden Grove, Santa Ana, Los Angeles. So this is the power of the Sharia. Right? This is the power of following the guidance of Allah Azza wa Jal. If we follow it, we will see those fruits. And when you see the fruits, it'll increase you in yaqeen and in iman. But you have to, again, start with yourself. And yes, you might say not everyone is doing it. You start, and it becomes contagious. Alhamdulillah, over the years, as we do these seminars, we get people who come up to me after the seminar, say, Sheikh, I didn't know this. Literally, someone said, he makes like $30 million a year. And he's like, I thought zakah was just going to the banquet and writing a check. I never calculated it. I might write a $10,000 check and I'm done. I thought that was zakah. It was like sadaqah. He says, no, it's 2.5% every year. He's like, oh man, okay, so now, his zakah is going to be substantial, right? So as we educate one another and encourage one another, right, that pool will go up. And inshallah, I pray that we live in a day, right, we have no poor Muslims in Southern California, right? And then we can take our zakah and then transfer it over to another community and another community and another community. So we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to increase us in our wealth. We ask Allah to make us amongst those who give zakah, that it purifies us, it purifies our wealth, it purifies our families.
Jazakallah khair. I have brother with you.
Let me fully close, then people can leave, and after that we'll do questions. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun al mursalin alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Jazakallah khair for your time. If you need to leave, I know we're getting closer to iftar time and everything else. Feel free to leave. It's open Q&A now, inshallah. So, yeah. That's what we should convey to people. So the question is, when you ask people for donations for the masjid, it is important that we tell people and educate them that you don't give zakat to the masjid. Now, if someone in their heart is like, I don't care what you say, I'm going to give my zakat to the masjid, yeah. Yes, yes. Yes. This is better. This is better. Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, typically you don't use zakat for like burying the dead. That's typically not. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Sure. Welcome. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Muzammil. Appreciate it. Jazakallah khair. Okay, we'll see you soon, inshallah. Okay.
So as we know, that's a prevalent asset in California and Southern California. Most people have properties, and some of them have multiple properties.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them have accumulated tens of millions of dollars in equity.
Yes.
And some of them plan to pass it on to their heirs. Mm-hmm. And when you do, they get it at the stepped-up basis. So therefore, there's no taxable tax consequence. I'm not sure about the zakat. But should these people who are receiving income, rental income as well, plus building equity, which is it's supposedly a business, but it's a passive business.
Yes, yes.
Are they required? What zakat are they required to pay, and how and when?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And again, this is why I said to you earlier, with all my research, I'm the most uncomfortable with the current fiqh of real estate. And you have to understand why historically. In the history of humanity, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, real estate was not a business early on. Like land was not, like in Medina, when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was in Medina, and people want land for houses, it's take what you want. It's an open city, you can grab your land, you just have to build your home. So I believe, I forgot the exact date, but it was almost like 100 years into the history of Islam, before people would rent places. That's like, so think about it, like this is the history of the fiqh that developed was not considering real estate as like a cash cow, right? People would, because land would not appreciate, right? And people don't want to have their money stuck in something that's not going to appreciate. And to be very honest, even if you go to the Midwest to this day, I'll give you a very explicit example, right? I have a family member who owned their home for over a decade in Minneapolis, and the house appreciated like 2% in a decade. So why would someone buy a home in Minneapolis for real estate purposes? You wouldn't do that, right? But in California and certain markets, everything is upside down, right? So the dilemma here is that all the traditional fiqh says that when you buy a property, right? Now, let's just say that you have to pay 2.5% on the house, as example. So you bought a rental home for $1 million, right? And you rent it out for $3,000 a month, as an example, right? $4,000 a month, right? Your zakat on that house would be $25,000 a year, right? That's actually pretty high, right? So it would actually nullify almost all of your rental income as well, right? So something about paying, like historically, there was no notion of paying the full ownership of the land. So the tricky here now we have to figure out is what might be more reasonable. So one of the things that I think we can consider as an avenue is to pay a percentage of the actual produce. So why do I say this? When you own agricultural land, why do people buy farms? You buy a farm, and the farm could be $1 million, but then you pay zakat on what grows from it, right? And you give like 5% or you give 10%, right? I think it might make more sense for us to consider something like giving a fixed percentage of what is growing from that property. So for instance, let's say it's rental income. Rather than including the rental income as general income, you would just take a percentage of it and give it in zakah. The problem is that the fiqh has not developed that fast yet because it's, again, very regional. So I don't want to say something that has little precedent because it's just dangerous in fiqh. So I would say that for people, the safest thing to do is, in your case, you're saying people will have multiple houses, right? What is their niyyah is the key thing here. If the niyyah is this is a business-like thing. Yes, I'm renting it out today, but my goal is like my deep niyyah is its appreciation. If that's the deeper niyyah, I think you should pay on the full value of the house because that's why you bought the home. Would you have bought that same home if it was not going to increase? And just for the sake of rental income? If the answer is yes, then you pay on the rental income. If you say, no, I'm buying it because of the appreciation, then I think you should pay on the value of the home. That's how I think I resolve currently the dilemma. Wallahu a'lam. Other questions?
Where does 2.5% come from?
Oh, the Prophet Isa, as he said, yeah, he said give 1/20th. Yeah,
Got
yeah, 1/20th of that asset. Yeah. So, yes. Yeah.
Yesterday night, I think you mentioned the scenario of a person who's like have like debts, but also not touching the cash and
Yep.
everything. So, for example, if someone has like $6,000 plus, but they also have like a car debt or
Yeah.
like a credit card debt, how does that work?
Great. I had a whole other section I skipped, but I can just show it to you real fast.
Okay, I'll
So
take a picture of it.
what you do,
Uh-huh.
if you send me an email, I can send. If grab my email from someone, I can send it to you if you need. What you have to do. So this is the formula. The formula you have ultimately. Let me show it to you. Is this? Your zakat due is your zakatable assets minus your loans. But the loans are actually split into two. You have to think about long-term loans and short-term loans, okay? A short-term loan is less than a year. You owe somebody within this year. If it's a short-term loan, you can deduct the whole loan. So let me give you a very explicit example. I have $10,000 in my bank account, but I owe you $5,000 due this year. When I'm calculating, and let's just say that next month is my zakat is due. But I still owe you $5,000, like, very, very soon. I would subtract, I'd say I have $10,000, but I owe you $5,000, so now I only have $5,000. I actually don't pay any zakat, right? That's a short-term loan. What if I owed you $5,000, but I owed it to you over 10 years? Now I owe you actually only $500 this year. So I'd only subtract 10,000, I'd subtract 500, now I owe zakat on 9,500, right? So just to show you like a way to do it is, this is simple, I can walk you guys through it. Let's take a couple scenarios. So scenario one, somebody had $25,000 in the beginning of Ramadan. So yes or no, do they have the nisab? Yes. So okay, now we would say, what happens a year later? So 6 months in, they bought a car for $22,000 cash. Now they only own $3,000. So now they're technically below the nisab, but we're actually not going to restart. We're going to actually just wait for the full year. Now before that, as that year came to end, they have $15,000 total in zakah, but they also have a short-term loan of $5,000. So now we would say you'd have $15,000 minus $5,000, you owe zakat on $10,000, you owe $250, right? Let's take another scenario. Here you had $75,000, so you have the nisab, but you bought a home for $500,000, and it had a $2,500 monthly payment. So you put $50,000 down, so you're 75, subtract 50, you now own $25,000. And you have that $25,000, now your zakat is due, right? Someone could, if they wanted to say, well, my mortgage payment is coming up, you could subtract it if you really, really wanted to. I don't think you should, because you also have income coming in, but let's just say you wanted to. So now you would say that short-term debt is only $2,500 that's coming up, so I pay zakat on the remainder of it, right? The third example, it's even more just explicit. So imagine somebody had, this number is a little bit off, but we can fix it. Let's say someone was below the nisab, and then 6 months later, they get above the nisab, right? And so now they've hit the nisab, they waited a whole year, at the end of the year, they have $10,000, right? But they have a student loan payment of $2,500 due, and they have a rent of $1,500 due, and they have a short-term loan of $3,000 due. So that $10,000, you subtract all of those short-term loans, and now they only own $3,000. They actually don't even have the nisab anymore. So despite the fact they have $10,000 in their account, because all of these liabilities are imminent, they actually don't have to pay zakah, right? So yeah, that's how you would do it. You'd go through your spreadsheets, lay all this stuff out, and then subtract your short-term liabilities. And if your short-term liabilities are, your zakat, if you meet the nisab after that, then you pay on the full amount, right? Yes. Yes, sir.
You said for helping people in debt. What if the person is a chronic debtor? They actually have to go to like Debtors Anonymous.
Yeah.
Would you help them?
Yeah, so that comes back to the issue of being prudent and wise and saying, what is this person's issue? So for instance, I had a case just like this where someone said that their father was horrible with money and would squander the money, and they would have, this is the real case, their water and power would go out regularly because they wouldn't have money for it. So I'd say, okay, they're eligible for zakah, yes, pay their water, tell them, I'll pay your water bill and your electricity bill, so that way you're just taking care of the specific debt and you're not actually facilitating some bad habit that they may have, right? So you can, again, pay off the debt, but you're doing it in a way that's going to ensure that it goes directly to the debtor rather than to the person who's then going to not use it properly, right? Yeah.
They do that for like 3 months to
Yeah.
somebody, and then they move out because they can't pay the rent.
Yeah.
What do you do?
So again, it comes back to the issue is, why are they in this predicament? Is it because they're genuinely in need? It's some sort of, or is it just that they're bad with money and wasting money? If they're wasting money, where it's like you actually have the money to pay the rent, but you keep going and wasting it on certain things, you don't give them zakah. But if they actually have, for instance, like temporary disabled, right, or some other factor that's making them chronically need zakah, that's actually okay. If someone is in chronically need of zakah, in a legitimate circumstance where even government assistance, everything else is not sufficient, zakah could be used to make sure that they're able to survive. Now, what you would suggest in that case is typically downsize and live the most reasonable lifestyle. So this happens. People have like a 4-bedroom home, and now they fall on hard times. So we can't pay your rent on your 4-bedroom home indefinitely. What's reasonable for you to live in, right? Do you need a 2-bedroom apartment? Okay, that's going to cut our zakat in half essentially, right? So we put people in a situation that's reasonable based on the holistic circumstances that they're in. There's a lot of ambiguity that goes into this. So there's no exact science to this. A lot of it is being prudent and wise and not squandering money that you have. No, but the thing, someone could be a chronic debtor, but again, the underlying thing is, why are they chronically in debt right now, right? So for instance, did someone fall under some economic hardship? No, so that they're just bad with money then. And then you don't give them zakah. Yeah. Allahu Alam. All right. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah. No, I don't have to be anywhere, but it's fine.